This encounter happened 13 years ago, and at the time I was 14 years old. My then best friend lived just down the street from me, and my cousin was dating her older brother, so I basically spent every day at her place. She lived on the 5th floor of a block of flats. It had 18 floors, so more often than not I'd just get on the elevator. On this particular day I was waiting on the elevator, and it was taking a while. Not so unusual. As I said, this building had 18 floors, so sometimes you had to wait a while if other people were using it. While I was waiting, a man entered the building and stood beside me waiting to get on the elevator as well. Not so odd, but something about this guy had me very creeped out. I can't say what about him made me so uneasy looking back, as he seemed like just a normal guy. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s with short dark hair, medium height and build, short beard and dressed well enough, but something about him just seemed off. I could feel his eyes on me as I continued to wait for the elevator. I'm a girl and I've always been small and looked younger than I was. Back then I was lucky if I was even 5 feet, and I looked about 11 or 12. I've had stranger danger and how dangerous people can be drilled into my head since I was little, and while it seems silly to be this terrified of a random man just waiting on an elevator same as me, I decided to still listen to my instincts. It was the best decision I have ever made. I casually walked to the stairwell, which is around the corner from the elevator. I walk in, and the second I'm out of sight and the door closed, I begin to run up those stairs as fast as I can. Now, back then I was fairly athletic. I did a lot of sports in my free time, so it didn't win me too bad to run up those stairs. About halfway up, I hear the stairwell door slam open and footsteps running up the stairs. I pause for a second, terrified, and look down the stairwell, seeing the face of the guy staring up at me from the 2 floors below before he begins to run up them. I run as fast as I can up the remaining floors, my legs burning from how fast I was running, barely able to catch a breath. I finally get to my friend's floor and exit the stairwell. I get to her door and begin to pound on her door, crying and begging her to let me in. She opens the door pretty confused, and I run inside, slamming the door behind me. So there I am, crying and shaking as she gets the story out of me. Her older brother, who was a 20-year-old guy and built really big, heard all of this, and he came out of his room to find out what the commotion was. He charged out of the flat and began to hunt the building for the guy, but he couldn't find him anywhere. I never saw that man from the elevator ever again. I don't know what he wanted me for or what he planned to do if he caught me, but I'm really glad I never found out.
I recently moved out of home and a couple towns away into a new home with my best friends. There's 4 of us, and I'm the unfortunate soul that works the second shift, while the other 3 work the first shift. So I really only see them during the week while they're sleeping. The first day of unpacking, I looked outside the kitchen window at the house across the street from us. It seemed like a family with a teenage girl. From my view, she looked no more than 16 or 17. When she stepped outside, she looked fairly normal. She had very fair skin and dark hair. I continued unpacking, not thinking anything until I looked back outside. She was sitting there on her porch, on her knees, and her posture was perfectly straight. She had her hair pushed to the front of her face and was sitting there perfectly still. As creepy as it was to see, I still tried to think nothing of it, as I was pretty weird as a kid myself. I hadn't seen anyone outside that house in the few weeks since then, until one night I was coming home from work. The other 3 in my home park in the driveway spots, and I park in the street on days when they have to work, so I don't have to move for anyone early in the morning. The house, however, sits on a curved part of the street, and our next door neighbor drives a utility truck for work, and he parks it on the side of the street as well. So it takes me a while to get my car parked. When I come across the corner, I saw the man, who I assume is the dad of the family across the street. He's standing out in the driveway, staring out into the trees. I thought to myself, it's 11 at night, so what could he possibly be looking at in the trees that couldn't wait until tomorrow? It being summertime, I had my windows down so I could hear talking, but wasn't sure where it was coming from, and no one was outside on the street except me and him, it seemed. He didn't seem to be on the phone, as he was just standing there with his arms crossed, looking straight up. Then I heard it, loud laughter. Not just laughter, full-on cackling laughter. It started out of nowhere. It didn't slowly start. It started very suddenly and loudly. Then I realized she was in the tree. The girl from before was in their tree at 11 o'clock at night, full on belly laughing on God knows what. I watched the dad walk back to the house, open the door and look in, still not talking to anyone. But over his shoulder it looked like the walls were stripped down to their studs. She stopped when he walked away, but as I closed my windows and locked my doors in my car, he walked back to the tree and she started right back up like she had never stopped. I walked straight up my driveway and into my house and didn't look back. Every night when I pull up now, I'm unsure what else I will see. But all I can say to the neighbors across the street is, let's not officially meet.
About 4 years ago, when I was 15 years old, me and my parents had moved into a brand new apartment, and we decided to get a puppy. We would walk him about 4 or 5 times a day, but we still struggled a lot with my dog separation anxiety. So I imagine for the first few weeks being there, it must have been hell for my neighbors, because he would always bark and cry whenever we left him all alone. However, every time we talked to my neighbors, they would just tell us not to worry about it because they hardly ever heard him, and everyone was fine with it. That is, except for Tony. One Saturday, I was home alone and someone knocked on my door. It was Tony. At first, he just seemed kind of somewhat surprised to see me open the door, but then he just smiled politely and then said,
"Hey, can you tell your parents to come see me when they get home, please?"
I said yes, and then he left. I thought nothing of it. When my parents came home, I told them about my encounter with Tony, and my dad went to his apartment, suspecting that it had something to do with my dog barking. Tony told my dad that my dog was a real barker and that he worked during the night and needed to get sleep during the day, so he would really appreciate it if we could find a way to make less noise, although he did say that he understood that he knows that it was hard to control a dog's bark. He also apologized for showing up at our door, saying that he didn't know I was alone in there. According to my dad, they had a pretty nice, polite conversation. My father had apologized for the inconvenience and then came home, and we did our absolute best to try and deal with my puppy's anxiety. And it worked. My dog, of course, did still bark, but wasn't so agitated as he used to be. Flash forward a few weeks. Every time my dog would sense Tony going down the stairs of our apartment building, my dog would always go nuts. He was a fairly friendly dog towards people, but for some reason, he just absolutely hated this guy. And Tony had stopped talking to us, pretty much ignoring us every time we ran into him, or he would simply just stare at us. One day, however, me and my mother came home and on our apartment door were 6 holes. It was like someone had punched the door with like a key or something sharp. My mother was pretty naive about it. She thought that maybe we had done the damage ourselves throughout the months that we'd been there. That's when Martha, one of our other neighbors, then called my mother, really worried about me, then questioning her if I had been home alone during that afternoon. My mom said no, and that's when Martha tells us that someone had apparently been banging and kicking at our door while also screaming a ton of insults, making a scene that was so terrifying that her 11-year-old son got so scared that he hid under his bed for like 4 hours until Martha came home, because he thought someone was breaking into our house. A few weeks later, there was a city fair at night, and my parents and I, plus Martha and her family, headed out to the building to go to the fair. We came back earlier around 11 p.m. It was almost 12 a.m. at this point, and someone had rang our doorbell. My dad went to see who it was, but no one responded. Usually when this happens, we either go to the window to try and see who it is, or we go downstairs, because it's usually the mailman. But since it was midnight, my dad found it very strange, and he didn't go downstairs. He pretty much just ignored it, and we all went to bed. Well, the next morning, my mother runs into Martha, and she tells my mom that when they got back from the fair, they found Tony hidden in the dark under the stairs with a freaking baseball bat in his hands. He looked really nervous, but said someone had rang the doorbell, and he found it really weird that someone would do that so late at night. So he apparently came downstairs to see who it was, and with a baseball bat. My mom pretty much immediately knew exactly what happened. He had rang our doorbell expecting my dad to come downstairs and see who it was. I honestly don't really know if his plan was to attack my dad or not, but my father, obviously worrying about me and my mother's safety since he wasn't home during the week, then went upstairs absolutely fuming and knocked on Tony's door. When Tony saw my father, I kid you not, he looked like he was about to pass out. My father had confronted him and Tony legit started crying. He told my dad that he sometimes did drugs and he really didn't know what he was doing. He then went on to apologize for actually damaging our door with a damn pocket knife, and for what happened the night before as well. He didn't even lie about it. As it turns out, the reason my dog freaked out every time he sensed him and barked so much was, well, because Tony waited until everyone in the building had left for work, and then he would go to my door and kick it, making my dog more furious every time, and not so much because of his anxiety. My dad then said very calmly, "This is the last time I'm gonna talk to you. Next time you come near me or even look in the direction of my family again, I'm gonna make my point very clear. Do you understand?" The guy kept crying and trying to hug my dad. We went to the police and filed a report, but we finally stopped seeing Tony. Turns out his wife actually kicked him out and filed a restraining order for her and their daughter, because apparently one morning she actually woke up with him staring at her and their daughter while they were sleeping, and the entire house smelled like gas because apparently he left the stove on. We moved shortly afterwards, and we never saw Tony again after that. My husband and I really love to go driving. We prefer road trips, but on the weekends or nights, whenever we have nothing better to do, we usually just go cruising and just drive around. We prefer smooth and not busy roads. On this particular night, we were really bored and decided to go cruising. We went up north to a small town about a half an hour from the city where the roads are really curvy and smooth. This town is pretty close to the mountains, and if you follow this particular main street all the way up north, it starts driving up to a mountain. It's about 9 p.m. and there are very few cars in the road already, since it's a small, nice little cute town. But we keep going north, away from all of the houses and stores, and eventually where the roads start curving uphill. We drive for about 15 minutes more, and it's pitch black when we see some blinking lights. As we get closer, we see that there's a truck on the side of the road facing us. I'm getting the chills thinking about being all the way out here in the middle of nowhere, and there's a stranded truck on the side of the road. As he slowly approaches closer, I tell my husband that it's probably for the best to just turn back and that I had a really bad feeling. But at this point, we're pretty much right next to the truck. As he pulls up next to the truck, a young blonde guy, maybe in his late 20s, comes around and gets next to our window. I get such a bad vibe by this, and I tell my husband not to put the window down. I think that he also gets a weird feeling, so he actually listens to me. He kinda just loudly asks what's wrong, and the guy says something along the lines of something's wrong with his truck and that he might need a hand with it. His phone is also dead. My husband asks what happened, but the guy just insists on showing him and to come take a look. He says it very friendly, and he even calls him bro, and he says that he's really glad we pulled up. My husband tells him, "You know what, man, I really won't be much help. I don't really know anything about cars, but let me call someone to see if they can help you with this." The guy is insisting, and he gets visibly upset. I'm looking back at the truck, and I thought that I caught some movement inside of the truck. I tell my husband that I really think we need to go. Like, now. He probably saw the look of fear that was all over my face because he then put the car in reverse, but as he did that, the guy is now right behind our car. He's acting really stressed out and rubbing his face and kind of pacing. So my husband decides to go forward instead. We drive up for maybe about 2 minutes, trying to find a place to turn around since the road is so narrow. The road turns to a dirt road and there's a little more space on the side, so he's able to turn the car around. I'm absolutely dreading going back that way now, and our phones have no signal at all. In my mind, I know that this could all really be someone with car problems. Maybe there's a friend in the truck too. He never said he was alone, but I just can't help the really bad feeling that was in my gut. We soon reach the area where the truck had been, but there's no truck at all. We then drive down maybe another 5 minutes, but no trace of the truck, and we're absolutely sure that we passed the place where it would have been. Like I said, we didn't drive up too far to begin with. I'm both relieved and absolutely terrified that the truck was no longer there. I mean, if it really had broken down, how did they get it to work again in such a short time? Calming myself down, I'm telling my husband, hey, maybe they really did get it to work. Maybe it turned on all of a sudden and they were able to drive off. I mean, it's suspicious, but not impossible. As we keep driving though, and the roads are straightening out, we notice far off the truck with all of the lights off, and it's parked to the side again, and we notice some movement in the bed of the truck. I say out loud, why did they turn off all the lights? I think that we're still way too far away to see them, but we see two figures get on the other side of the truck and then crouch down as if they're trying to hide. We get closer and my husband floors it. As we drive past, the two men get up. One of them the guy we had spoken to, and the other someone else, with a very surprised look on both of their faces. One of them runs behind us for a bit, and we see them getting tinier in the back. I keep looking back, absolutely terrified, but it's dark back there now, when all of a sudden I then see the headlights turn on in the truck. They then start driving in our direction, and very fast. My husband keeps going fast, and eventually we finally lose the headlights. I keep looking back the rest of the way, so scared that they're somehow still following us. Maybe they turned off their lights again and we just can't see them. Anyway, after driving for a very long time back to the city, we try to convince ourselves that no one's following us. We decide to call the non-emergency line and give them a description of what we saw. No, we didn't get the plates of the truck. It was all so fast, and in all of the fear, I just really didn't think to get them. We give a description of the guy we saw and the type of truck it was, but there was really nothing else that could really be done. Now, I realized that all of this could probably be rationalized, but in the moment, we were absolutely filled with terror. I mean, being out there in the middle of nowhere and all the possibilities. They could have been armed. They could have put their truck sideways on the road and left us with nowhere to go. They could have put something out in the road to rip up our tires. And even though it could all have some sort of explanation, there's still so many questions. Why couldn't he tell us what was wrong? How did the truck work again so fast? Why did they turn off all of their lights, and why did they hide? It's been about a year and it's just a creepy experience now. We still go cruising, but we usually just stick to a little more civilized areas now. That is, at least for nighttime cruises.
My mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at my desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. While I was doing homework, I put my headphones on and listened to loud music. There was a storm that night, and my desk was facing the window, so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents came home around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off my headphones. As soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout my name. "What on earth happened here?" she demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and saw the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. I have no idea how those got there. I spent the whole night at my desk doing my homework. I watched as her face changed from anger to confusion, and then to fear. We both realized at the same time someone must have been in the house. We followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually leave unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there is no trail of the footprints going back through that door. All of a sudden, we hear a loud, pounding noise that echoed throughout the house, then the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slamming shut. We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. "Please come quickly. There's someone in our house." After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One of the officers stayed with us in the garage. while his partner went through the house, searching it room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was no one in the house and it was safe to go back in. As we were all breathing a sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "It's mine," I told the officer. She asked me to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of the muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway and up the stairs, into my parents' bedroom, and towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at the door, which had been open the whole night. Scrawled on it in blue marker was the following: 8:47, I see you. 8:53, you forgot to lock your back door. 8:59, you seem focused. 9:27, turn around. 9:47, look at me. 10:15, look at me. 10:37, look at me. 10:49, look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think of what would have happened if I would have turned around.
Okay, so this happened about a year ago. I'm in a long-distance relationship and I often fly to visit. I didn't have a ride arranged to come and pick me up, so I usually just use a Lyft or Uber to get to and from the airport. This particular ride started off fine. It was a guy from Haiti and he had a very thick accent that was often hard to understand. The beginning of the ride was just him making small talk like most drivers do. Where are you flying from? Are you in college? Do you have family here? And so on. We get on the freeway and there's a lot of traffic. I had a layover flight and of course all of the outlets were in use, so I couldn't charge my phone. I'm really hoping that this traffic lightens up soon because I really need to keep in contact with the people I'm going to be staying with. Of course, with my luck, the app crashes and then says, "You have arrived," while we're literally in the middle of the freeway near no houses at all. I get kind of annoyed and the driver says that he'll pull over at this Walmart that's nearby so we can try and figure out what's wrong. Apparently he had a very old phone and it wasn't giving proper directions, so I said that we could use mine but that I needed to charge it. He asked me to sit up front so that it was easier, and I thought nothing of it, so I decided to go up front. He tells me that he'll take me the rest of the way for free without using the Lyft app. I put the address in my phone and we're back on our way. As we're pulling out of the Walmart parking lot, he then decides to ask me how old I am. I told him that I had just turned 18, and that's when things got kinda weird. He seemed to lighten up at how young I was, which was a bit odd, but whatever. He then asks me a series of questions like,
Why don't you live here? You should move here. You should go to college here, so why don't you? I'm a doctor and Lyft is just a side job for me, so I have a lot of money.
This man was at least in his mid-40s. I told him that I had no money to just randomly move states and start college, seeing as I had just become a legal adult. He then told me,
I can take care of you. I'll buy you a little apartment and a nice car, and I can take you out and pay for your college.
I thought that he was joking, so I kinda just awkwardly laughed and then said, That's okay, you don't need to do that. But he just kept insisting on it, and I was starting to get really creeped out. I really didn't want to jump to conclusions. I thought that maybe he's just not sure how to hold proper conversations since he's foreign or something. About 20 minutes later, we're about 5 minutes away from my destination. My phone kept doing that annoying thing where it's charging then not charging that phones do whenever the charger wires are loose. I had this phone for a really long time, so it did this sometimes. And apparently it hadn't really been charging much at all, and then it died. Since we were so close to the destination though, I told him that I knew the rest of the way, but I'd tell him to turn right and he'd say okay and then purposely turn left or keep going straight. Literally anything but what I told him to do. Now we're lost because he's literally ignoring everything I'm saying and playing it off as some sort of an accident, and I'm not super familiar with the entire area. I really only knew a small portion of the streets. He tells me that he lives nearby, and I start getting really scared because I think he's gonna kidnap me or something. I then let out a single tear. I tell myself to keep it together because usually in the movies, whenever they see fear, they usually get mad or something. So I try really hard to try and make it seem like I'm not totally losing my crap. He finally turns back around, and when we're almost there again, he then starts purposely going the wrong way yet again. At this point, I got my phone to about 5%. He reaches over while at a red light, grabs my phone, and then he rates himself 5 stars on Lyft and also friends me on Facebook. He also puts his phone number in my phone and tells me to call him if I ever need anything and that we should go out sometime. I give a little fake smile so he doesn't know that I'm about to crap myself from all of the fear. I eventually get so fed up that I just jump out at another red light and then tell him, "Thanks, but you're really scaring me. Bye." I then call my boyfriend on my 5% battery life and I tell him where I am because I'm really scared and I need him to pick me up. The Lyft driver is now shouting out the window for me to get back in the car, but there's no way in hell I was going back in there to be some man's sugar baby, and was also a total stranger. I then decide to go somewhere with a lot of people and wait for my boyfriend. Now, this whole ordeal actually made the ride last about 2.5 hours, and it should have only taken about 45 minutes, even with all of the traffic. Later, I called Lyft and I told them everything. He was supposedly fired, so I guess that's good. Anyway, to the random Lyft driver looking for a young sugar baby to try and kidnap, if you happen to see me again whenever I visit, please just stay away from me.